My name is Dan Petrell, and I am the Senior Director for Strategic Communications for Maryland Realtors. We are excited to begin this news conference soon, but a couple of guidelines first. First of all, you'll notice that we're turning your cameras off when you arrive. Please turn your cameras off so we can focus on our speakers at hand. Um, and Our panel is going to be presenting the findings from our 2025 State of Maryland Housing Survey, along with insight into this data. We ask that you keep your mics muted. At the closing of our statements, we have provided time for questions from the media. When we open the floor for questions, we ask that you raise the hand icon within Zoom. We will answer questions in the order they appear. You can also use the Q&A box if you prefer to position your question that way. When it comes to time to answer your question, please unmute yourself, state your name, the media outlet you represent, and your question. Once we've answered your question and or any follow-up, please mute your mic as we move to the next question. Finally, just letting you know, we are recording this meeting to share with our members. Thank you for your attendance, and we're glad you're here. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our President 2025, Cheryl Abrams Davis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Maryland Realtors, welcome to our 2025 virtual State of Maryland Housing News Conference. My name is Cheryl Abrams Davis, the 2025 President for Maryland Realtors. Also on this call is our President-elect, Denise Lewis, and our CEO, Chuck Caskey. While they may not be able to join us, we would like to thank Delegate Vaughn Stewart from District 19 in Montgomery County and Senator Mary Washington from District 43, covering Baltimore City and County. Both Delegate Stewart and Senator Washington served on the ADU, also known as Accessory Dwelling Units, Task Force, and they are sponsors of Senate Bill 891 and House Bill 1466, which seeks to enact uniform ADU standards across all of Maryland. We appreciate their active interest in uniform ADU adoption. Today, we are discussing results from our 2025 survey of Maryland voters taken recently in January 2025. This survey was conducted by the independent polling firm American Strategies. Not only does it measure Maryland voters' sentiments on housing issues, these surveys from 2020 through 2025 provide trend lines that show that Maryland's housing challenges are getting worse, not better over time. Bringing up one of the most important findings first. Maryland voters volunteered without being prompted, without being presented a list of issues, that housing affordability was their number one concern. So yes, there's a lot to review today. Should any of you have any questions about our survey's methodology, please feel free to reach out to Dan Petrell, our Maryland Realtors Senior Communications Director, who can connect you with Joe Good from American Strategies. We are the state's largest professional trade association with more than 28,000 realtor members. Maryland Realtors has seen firsthand the housing challenges facing the state's citizens. On a daily basis, our members are on the front lines working with Marylanders, people who work here in the Free State, who continue to be priced out of our Maryland housing market. From the survey's findings, we're hearing, and today we're sharing two messages very loud and clear. Marylanders, particularly some of the younger Marylanders, the backbone of the state's workforce, are so fed up with the cost of housing that they're seriously considering leaving the state in search of more affordable housing across our borders. And at the same time, more and more Marylanders have grown in favor of having more affordable housing options within their communities. It's no accident that these two message points to one undeniable truth. The truth of housing in Maryland grows increasingly dire. Yet when we commit to working together, we can make 2025 a year of housing opportunity for all Marylanders who live here, work here, and thrive here. Let me go back a little bit and give you a brief history. To know where we want to go, it's important to examine from where we came. In 2020, Maryland had a housing shortage of 80,000 units. In just 4 years, this shortage has nearly doubled to 150 units. More and more potential homebuyers are bidding on the same houses, which drives prices upward. In 2024, Maryland Realtors worked with the General Assembly and the Governor's Office on the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act, which was just signed into law this past April. We were pleased to see middle housing codified into law and it is defined as the duplexes, the triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and other affordable housing types that were once prevalent in the 1970s. Important in this legislation was how it removed local zoning barriers to encourage new home construction, including middle housing. As we pivot to the present, the reality is that even after 2024's landmark legislation, some local governments continue to drag their feet to open housing opportunity in their communities. And that's a shame. And that's on them, frankly, because they're not getting it. Marylanders shouldn't have to wait for those local governments to get their collective acts together. What we're looking forward to in this current legislative session is to empower Marylanders with housing opportunities that they could take advantage of fairly quickly and support measures that would limit local government's ability to hide behind zoning and other excuses to limit affordable housing options within their communities. To that first point, what can the General Assembly do to empower Marylanders with housing opportunity that could blossom relatively quickly? What is something that could potentially add up to 30,000 units throughout the state? We're talking about ADUs, of course, accessory dwelling units. These are sometimes called granny flats or in-law suites. ADUs are small independent housing units located on the same lot as a primary residence. They can be attached to the original home or completely detached on the same property. Because homeowners would build or rehab a space for such a unit on their existing property, it doesn't require the time needed to develop and build a new housing community. Because it already exists on the same footprint as the current house, its impact on public facilities is minimal. In 2022, Maryland Realtors fought hard for statewide ADU adoption. And in 2023, the General Assembly assembled a task force to study the viability of statewide ADU adoption. In July 2024, this task force overwhelmingly recommended the adoption of uniform ADU regulations throughout the state. Two of the members of that task force, Senator Mary Washington and Delegate Vaughn Stewart, have taken the recommendations of this task force, and they have submitted Senate Bill 891 and House Bill 1466, which provides property owners across Maryland with the ability to add an ADU to their property if they would like. Maryland Realtors strongly supports this bill to adopt uniform ADA regulations throughout our state. In many ways, this statewide ADU adoption is a no-brainer. Along with aligning with Maryland Realtors' support of the private property rights of Marylanders, ADUs add smaller, more affordable housing options to the pool of available homes in any community. Unlike new home developments, an ADU can be constructed or rehabbed in a relatively short order. Each ADU built has a minimal impact on the local community's infrastructure. And lastly, they appeal to Marylanders who have been priced out of the market, i.e. seniors or those with disabilities or service economy workers and our young professionals. Once again, we thank Delegate Vaughn Stewart of District 19, Montgomery County, and Senator Mary Washington, District 43, Baltimore City and County, for their work on this important ADU legislation. Pivoting to other legislation facing the General Assembly, let's talk further about service workers, young professionals, and anyone who holds a job in our state. When local governments restrict housing production, they are impacting, and not in a good way, Maryland's house and workforce. When 42% of Maryland's young renters say that they're considering leaving the state because of housing costs, you have to ask, why are local governments still dragging their feet? This is why Maryland Realtors supports the Housing for Jobs Act, which would encourage housing production where there is insufficient supply to meet the needs of that area's workforce. We would encourage local governments to be part of the solution in finding housing opportunity for all of its citizens. It would help their bottom line too, because each home sale in Maryland contributes over $126,000 to the local economy. More homes for workers means more economic activity, which means a stronger economy. That's simple math. How else can the General Assembly open housing opportunity for more Marylanders? Well, I have an answer for you. The General Assembly should consider expanding tax credits for homeowners and renters. While the homeowners and renters property tax programs provide relief, they have not kept up with the cost of living. As real estate practices and prices and wages and assessments soar skyward, these tax credits serve fewer and fewer residents each year. Speaking as a realtor who has helped clients access these programs, they can mean the difference between affording a new home in Maryland or moving out of state for a cheaper one. We look forward to working with the General Assembly to keep more Marylanders in Maryland. Finally, let's talk about the strength of housing, what it does for the state and every citizen in every city and county within. As I mentioned before, the average economic impact of a home sale in Maryland is $126,800. This is money going to hardware stores for improvement projects, lawn or landscaping services, house cleaning services, etc. When a new homeowner arrives in a community, they are buying food at the local grocer, getting their latte at a locally owned coffee shop, and having their car serviced at a nearby garage. In 2023, Maryland reported $10.17 billion in annual property tax revenues and $1.08 billion in transfer recordation tax revenues, all from housing. Guess what, everybody? Housing drives Maryland's economy. In 2023, housing made up 12.7% of Maryland's gross domestic product. That's $78.9 billion to the state's economy. Maryland Realtors encourages members of the General Assembly to think proactively when it comes to housing. This means continue to fully fund and expand the Maryland Mortgage Program, which helps homebuyers, the same ones who are considering leave the state, to find homes right here in Maryland, and avoid proposals to add new taxes and fees, including transfer taxes, sales taxes, services taxes, which could add as much as $10,000 or more to each new home. Maryland Realtors encourages the General Assembly to encourage growth and not burden homeowners, home buyers, and home sellers with unwise program cuts and tax increases. One of the more eye-opening discoveries that we learned from these survey results was that without prompting, Maryland voters volunteered that housing affordability was their #1 concern. Maryland Realtors encourages the General Assembly to listen to voters and make housing affordability their top priority without raising taxes and fees on the backs of homeowners and home buyers. Thank you for your time today. I would now like to introduce you to our President-elect, Denise Lewis, to review the findings from our 2025 survey of Maryland voters. Denise.
Wow, thank you, Cheryl. Maryland Realtors has worked with American Strategies since 2020, surveying registered Maryland voters on housing-related issues. This survey, conducted between January 6th and 9th of 2025, provides as clear a picture as ever that Maryland needs action now to address our current housing crisis. Some of our current findings include, as Cheryl just mentioned, for the first time, Maryland voters volunteered without prompting, without any multiple choice list, that housing is their #1 concern. Not crime, not healthcare, not jobs, housing. 98% of voters aged 18 to 34 say that it's harder to buy a home now than in previous generations. 91% say that even with a full-time job, the ability to afford a home presents a huge or medium obstacle to becoming a homeowner. And 61% of Marylanders say that housing costs are a strain on their budgets. 84% of registered Maryland voters think the cost to buy a home is too high. This is 27 points higher than when voters were asked this question in 2020. 47% say there are too few homes to buy, up 17 points from 2020. There's no joy in renting either. 81% said the cost of rent is too high versus 61% in 2020. When Maryland voters are asked about the housing supply, 66% say there's too little housing for people with moderate income. 67% say there's too little housing for people with low incomes. 64% say there's too little housing for seniors and those with special needs. 75% say there's too little housing for younger people getting started in their careers. And speaking of younger people, 42% of renters are considering leaving the state due to prohibited housing costs, and 36% of Maryland voters ages 18 to 34 are considering leaving Maryland because of housing cost. While this is not good news, there is hope. 81% favor making it easier to construct accessory dwelling units, and attention local governments, 63% of all Marylanders believe that excessive regulations make it too difficult to build affordable housing options. That includes majorities of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. And majorities are expecting more from their state and local officials on the issues of housing. So yes, Marylanders feel that housing is more costly and lacking in substantial availability, and it's getting so serious that our younger generations are considering leaving the state. But the opportunity is also very much real. Marylanders favor accessory dwelling units and are looking to policymakers to make it easier to build all types of housing. All we have to do is grasp this opportunity, embrace it, and build a better Maryland. I would now like to turn it over to Maryland's CEO, Chuck Caskey, to wrap things up and take any questions you may have. Chuck?
Thank you, Denise. Excuse me, and thank you, Cheryl. We're at a crossroads, aren't we? And I just want to call a little bit of attention to some of those numbers. Denise gave us a lot of numbers, and we have those, and we can share the poll results. When we reviewed the results with our pollster, he was flabbergasted. They said, if you have 80+%, 90+% of poll respondents agreeing on an issue, that's pretty significant, nearly unanimous, quite rare, and very, very impactful. So those are very, very important numbers when it comes to this crisis. What real estate contributes to Maryland's economy is a fact. As was mentioned earlier, that $78.9 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars benefiting the state's economy in 2023. That wasn't a projection. It's what real estate actually delivered to the state's bottom line. We were happy to work with the administration and the General Assembly last year on the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act, because all of us recognized then, as we do now, that local zoning remains the biggest impediment to available and affordable housing. By making it harder to build the housing we need, we are shortchanging our own citizens and our own tax base. Using imperfect tools like adequate public facility ordinances, which many local governments are doing, or giving in to the vocal minority of NIMBYs provides a disservice to the constituents and to Maryland as a whole. Let there be no doubt. One piece of legislation won't fix a problem that's been ignored for decades. The housing crisis we're in today, short nearly 150,000 units in 2024, is a direct result of local governments zoning things like middle housing out of existence, making it harder, not easier, to meet our housing needs. Last year's Housing Expansion and Affordability Act was an important first step, but there is so much more to do. This year, we are advocating for Maryland to take 4 more important steps for housing. First, enact uniform statewide ADU laws to provide more housing for seniors, service workers, and young professionals, as recommended by the ADU Task Force and, as was mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 891 and House Bill 1466. Local governments participated in that task force and participated in the drafting of the final report, did not object to the findings of the report that are reflected in the bills. So we should have a consensus on that. Second, connect housing supply to workforce populations, as the Housing for Jobs Act seeks to do. This is a brilliant way to further hold local zoning authorities accountable to their citizenry. Third, raise income and asset caps on homeowners and renters' property tax credits, as Cheryl mentioned, which haven't been adjusted in years, to lower the cost of owning and renting a home in Maryland. The current income limits have not been raised since 2009, and asset value caps haven't been raised since 2016. Meanwhile, wages have increased, making more people ineligible, and property valuations have grown approximately 50% in just the last 5 years. We need to modernize these numbers to help Marylanders. These programs were intended to help. And finally, hold housing harmless in upcoming budget deliberations for an industry that brings in billions and billions of dollars to our state and local economies. Let's not sacrifice this contribution by cutting important housing programs like the Maryland Mortgage Program or raising service taxes or fees that could add, as Denise said, $10,000 or more to the purchase of a home. At these crossroads, let's take a stand and support legislation that will keep Marylanders in Maryland. This benefits our citizenry, our local governments, our counties, and our state. There was a lot of valuable insight provided by our annual survey of Maryland voters. Denise mentioned a lot of those, but I think some of those more striking points bear repeating. 42% of young renters are considering leaving the state, leaving Maryland and the communities in which they live because of the prohibitive cost of housing. How many people need to leave, and how long does our economy need to suffer before local governments reconsider their restrictive zoning habits? Second, and this is one of those big numbers, 81% of Maryland voters, not just Maryland residents, Maryland voters, hello, favor statewide adoption of ADUs. That's an encouraging number, maybe even a little staggering, as I mentioned earlier. And it raises the question, how far are local governments willing to go against the will of their constituents? Finally, let's remember that from this survey, Maryland voters offered up housing as their #1 concern. And I know I'm repeating what's already been said, but this is important. This was an open-ended question, as Denise mentioned, unprompted. They provided the answer, and Maryland policymakers need to hear this. So let's make our communities a place for all Marylanders to live, work, and thrive. We strongly urge the Maryland General Assembly to support the bills that support housing opportunity and affordability, and we look forward to working with them in good faith for the benefit of all Marylanders. And now Dan will open the floor for questions.
Thank you. And for anyone wishing to ask a question, please use the raise hand icon located in Zoom. If you could state your name and the media outlet you represent, that would be great. Do we have any questions that you would like to ask?
Until someone puts a question in the box, Dan, can you let all of our viewers know like where they can find the results of the survey and how they can get their hands on that while we're waiting?
Absolutely. I will share my screen again. There's a nice little QR code
Okay.
here. Find it. If you go, folks, to this screen, use the QR code, you can download our complete results of this survey. You can download our infographic, which lists the key findings from this survey. And we have two videos that really bring home very important points that our speakers today discussed. One is the importance of ADUs and the reason we need to move forward on legislation this year on that. And also the contribution that housing brings to Maryland's economy. Those are two important videos, and we hope you can enjoy them as we speak. And let's see here. And for members of the media, those resources are also in the news release that you have. We know we had some media out there, but if you have questions, we would welcome you to answer them, but ask them. But if not, we can appreciate your shyness.
If you need some time to process all that information that you're going to get from that QR code, we understand, and Dan's information is
We
there
have-
for you to follow up with him after the fact as well.
We
And
do
I
have a
just-
question. I'm sorry to
just-
interrupt
We
you.
do have
I
a
just wanted
question.
to say that I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on that $79 billion number. You know, that says how valuable that we are to Maryland economy as realtors and how much we contribute to the economy of this great state of Maryland. And so I think it's phenomenal that we're able to do what we do, but we would like to do more of it in a way that benefits Marylanders better.
Okay, we have a question from WBAL News Radio. Did the
Sure.
survey ask any questions about blight in Baltimore City? And/or does anyone have any takes on how Baltimore City is tackling that issue to restore the current units to a livable condition? Chuck, I'm going to cue that one to you.
Yeah. The answer to the first question is no. This was a statewide survey. We did not focus on local issues. So the answer on that question is no. Do we have any takes on how they're tackling it? There are news articles, various news articles. It's been an intractable problem. I don't think there's any question about that. And the absentee owners of vacant properties have been a very difficult issue for the Baltimore city government and the state government as well, for that matter. Nobody disagrees with the fact that vacants in Baltimore are a problem. I'm a resident of Baltimore City. I see it every day. We're still trying different solutions, but yeah, the answer to, unfortunately, we don't have any specific insight since we deal mostly on statewide legislation. Good issue, Rachel. And if you want to reach out to us, we can help. And our Greater Baltimore Board of Realtors is very, very tied in with the political situation in Baltimore City. And so I would highly recommend you reach out to our folks at GBBR and to get additional insight. They are very, very tied in to what's going on in Baltimore City.
Good answer. I was just about to make the same
I saw you
recommendation.
react out of the corner of my eye. I went,
Thank you.
You would have filled in for me if I missed it. Thank you, Cheryl.
And you're welcome, Rachel. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right, well, anyways, thank you for your interest. My name is Dan Petrell again, and if my contact information is on the media release that you have. If you have any further questions, or if you'd like to schedule an interview with Cheryl or Chuck or Denise, please reach out and I'd be happy to help you arrange that. With that, thank you, and thank you for your interest in housing in Maryland, and have a great and safe day today.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Maryland Realtors behind the scenes staff who had to pivot and put everything together at the last minute. We appreciate how you were able to get everyone on Zoom at the 11th hour due to the weather. And thank you to our partner who did the survey. So thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.